Egypt and the art of Egypt. I think Discovery Channel has a 20-part miniseries that you could watch, or you can just be here for the next 30 minutes as we auction off everything that's ever happened in art in Egypt. All right, on the left, you're going to see 6 sort of guiding questions that we're going to use to make sure you're paying attention, of course, as we go through the modules, but also so you get a better understanding of what it is we want you to understand most and be able to take with you when you leave here. And when we talk about discussion-based assessments, what are those themes or ideas that we're going to be looking for? And so those concepts that you want to pay most attention to are kind of listed here in these 5 multiple choice questions, and then sort of an open response question. The open response question is what I want to pay the most attention to right now. And that is, what are the common themes or concepts in Egyptian art that are representative of a unified Egyptian culture? We're going to be looking at the different progressions, the evolutions that Egypt went through. And there are certain themes that carry throughout. And what we want to do is kind of pay attention to what are those themes, find out what they are, and look for evidence of how we can see those as they continue through those different incarnations. Gods of Egypt were of nature and the unchanging, perpetual order of the natural world. The rising and the setting of the sun and the flooding and the receding of the Nile was their divine order. Pharaohs who were generated from these gods and would one day return to them provided order to the state. And so Egyptian mortal life was devoted to the preparations for the afterlife. And what we see from tombs to sarcophagus to the pyramids, or this idea is that we're going to create some type of everlasting tribute to the lives of these pharaohs and so forth. The structures of everyday life, homes, public buildings, even palaces, were made from simple materials. This is important to understand. The Egyptians were limited to the things they had around them. Palm trunks, mud bricks. Most of these things didn't survive because they weren't long-lasting materials. But the temples, the tombs, those things made of stone, often they say immense proportions. They're absolutely huge. Great Pyramid of Giza is enormous. And they were constructed to be there for eternity. They are much different now than they were then, but they're still there. Egyptian art centered on 4 concepts, and these are the 4 ideas that we want to kind of take a look at putting right now. You should be writing those down in that little open response area. These are the 4 things we want to kind of look at. The themes that carry throughout: order, stability, perpetuality, and the obsession with the immortality. These were characterized in the environment, the political system, the religious systems, the mindset, the way they did everything. You can kind of see, even as different rulers, different dynasties come and go, these 4 themes sort of remain paramount in the evolution. Okay. So right now you should be putting those 4 there. We're going to take a look sort of now, where is Egypt? What are we talking about? While Mesopotamia suffered through wave after wave of upheaval, Egypt enjoyed a remarkable continuity and stability for roughly 3,000 years. That's a long time to have a lot of stability. Egypt's natural borders, the Libyan Desert in the west, the Arabian Desert in the east, isolated and protected Egypt, the fertile Nile Valley with its temperate climate nourished the peoples. So that fertile Nile Valley, during the Neolithic era, during the Neolithic period, the Nile Valley was inhabited by 2 ethnic groups. A people originally from Africa occupied the upper, the southern Egypt, and a group initially from Asia occupied the lower or the northern Egypt. And it's referred to as the upper and lower because of the flow of the Nile River from upstream to downstream, and not geographically as it relates to north and south. A powerful king from Upper Egypt united the 2 separate principalities and established the first unified nation known to humanity. This unification began what became a line of dynasties, and Egyptian history is kind of divided into these different dynasties. You have the Pre-Dynastic era, the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom. When we look at these years of influence, 5400 to 3100 BCE is that Pre-Dynastic. When we're talking about BCE, that's the before Common Era. When I was a kid, we used to call it before Christ and the BC. But for the Common Era, The Old Kingdom, 3100 to 2125 BCE. Middle Kingdom, 2125 to 1650 BCE. And the New Kingdom, 1650 to 1069 BC. Kind of a very short-lived New Kingdom. And so you can kind of see what we're going to align, what work kind of lines up with each of these different dynasties, from the tomb paintings, pyramids of Giza, the treasures of King Tut. When I was a kid, one of my favorite comedians was Steve Martin. Had a song called King Tut, and so when I was a kid, I knew everything about King Tut that I could find out only because of Steve Martin. We're going to pause just for a second and make sure everybody understands where the Egypt is located. And let's take just a quarter minute. I'm going to pause like I'm stuck and press the pause button. All right, and then we'll go on. All right. Hieroglyphics. The Egyptians developed their own system of writing known as hieroglyphics. Unlike the development of cuneiform, the Egyptians did not discard or simplify the early picture forms as the language developed. A group of French scholars who accompanied Napoleon during his invasion of Egypt in 1799 uncovered what they called the Rosetta Stone, named after a nearby town in the Nile Delta. The slab contained a text praising an Egyptian king in 3 different languages: Egyptian hieroglyphics, Egyptian Demotic, and Greek. Scholars were then able to translate hieroglyphics using Greek. So by using a language we already knew and was established, we could therefore sort of easily translate these hieroglyphics and create a dictionary, if you will, a way of organizing and understanding what they were saying. Much of the hieroglyphics that remain today were written to praise the gods of Egypt and their kings or pharaohs. In the mind of the ancient Egyptians, the two were inseparably linked. Hieroglyphics also serve as a method of documentation for record keeping. This, again, probably not the very first form of writing, but it's the first that we recognize. And documentation was paramount, and it's why we understand a lot of what went on now, because we can translate those types of picture writings. Pre-dynastic art. Pre-dynastic art is strikingly different from any of the art that would soon follow. The tightly ordered society of the dynastic Egypt. In the tomb painting of Hieroglyphics, and that's actually not how you pronounce that. That's how we learned to had this conversation. Mr. Enriquez yesterday, my art teacher, would always pronounce things, and as when I'm going back, realizing Hieroglyphics, there's no extra O, and so it's Hieroglyphics. I'm not good at saying it, but that's how it's supposed to be said. 3500 to 3200 BC, a city in the Upper Egypt near Thebes. We see an apparently random composition with cargo-laden boats, warriors, hunters, and animals. This work more closely resembles the Neolithic murals of the Katahayak. If you remember, last week we talked about Katahayak being one of the first civilizations known to man. And the first examples of architecture we had. And we had similar sorts of these relief images and sculptures and murals there as well. This is evidence of the tremendous cultural change between the peoples of the Upper and Lower Egypt. We'll have entering into the dynastic period. This transition is best displayed in Egyptian art in their ancient stone palettes. These pieces were carved on both sides with low relief. When we talk about relief, that's three-dimensional work, but it's a very sort of low. That's where low relief or high relief is really how much three-dimensionality is affected. But when we talk about relief, we're really talking about a two-dimensional surface. It's designed to be looked at on a flat two-dimensional surface, but it has raised elements that give us that three-dimensionality form. All right. These pieces are carved on both sides with low relief, and on one side carved out depression. Initially, scholars believe palettes were used to prepare eye makeup, not initially for cosmetic reasons, but rather for protection from the sun's glare. Since these palettes have been found in the innermost recesses of the religious structures, they were probably more than just utilitarian objects. And when we talk about utilitarian art, we're talking about art that's just used for generally a singular purpose, mugs, bowls, that kind of thing. In this event, putting on makeup. The palette of an armor, 3000 BCE, is unlike the tomb painting Ericanopoulos. Order dominates the composition. The palette records the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt and features the mighty King Narmer. And if you can see here, we talked a little bit about this last week about how the different size scale often projects the hierarchical. In the back of the palette, we see the King Narmer in his hierarchical scale and wearing the crown of Upper Egypt, slaying his enemy while his attendant follows behind him in sandals. Before the king is a human-handed falcon representing the god Horus, the protector of the pharaohs. The falcon rests upon and has a hold of a symbolic representation of Lower Egypt, which Narmer brings under his control. In the upper register, Narmer's name is written between two cows' heads representing the gods Hathor and divine mother of the pharaohs, making it the oldest known example of labeled art. The oldest known example of labeled art. We're going to stop here just for a second and talk a little bit about relief just for a second and make sure you've got the understanding of what hieroglyphics are and how they were used. And we'll take just a few seconds here. I'm going to pause. Okay, we're back after that pause. If order and stability characterized ancient Egyptian society, then a preoccupation with afterlife defined the ancient Egyptian mindset evident in their architecture. Hint, hint. I think that's question number 3. The Egyptians believed that a person had an alter ego or a life force called a Ka, which continued on after the living body passed away. The Ka still needed some sort of body, which is why the Egyptians preserved the corpse through mummification. The deceased would be entombed with all the goods of his life, from food to furniture to pets, among other things, to ensure that a person's Ka would be able to enjoy them in the next life. Earliest Egyptian tombs were walled graves that a person could be buried along with their possessions, placed on the west side of the city to face the setting sun. Grave sites evolved into mastabas, which were built over these walled graves and would continue to evolve into pyramids. The mastaba in the Imhotep was generally a rectangular stone with a brick sculpture, sloping sides, and a shaft connecting the underground tomb and the outside through which the Ka would supposedly move. The mastaba became more and more elaborate. Chambers were added to the tomb in order to house the deceased worldly possessions, and chapels with a small chamber called the sardab were added, where a statue of the deceased that would house its Ka would dwell. The interior walls were decorated with painted reliefs and drawings to provide entertainment and nourishment for the deceased in the afterlife. Mastabas grew larger to support multifamily burials, becoming entire complexes. In Imhotep, the connection between the mastaba structures and the Great Pyramids is the step pyramid of King Djoser, a pharaoh of the 3rd dynasty. The structure, circa 2750 BCE, serves as the oldest example of colossal Egyptian architecture. It holds the basic plan of the mastaba and is the earliest work in history with a named artist, Imhotep, who is a royal diplomat and a priest. He built 6 mastabas of constant height but of diminishing size, one upon the other. The construction resembles a Mesopotamian ziggurat, but the function was very different. This step pyramid was intended to protect the tomb and possessions of the deceased king, as well as display his power and divinity with its height. The structure stood nearly 200 feet tall, approximately the equivalent of a 6-story building. Step pyramids. These step pyramids are part of a larger complex. The area was enclosed by a 35-foot wall, projecting and recessing segments nearly a mile in the perimeter. Within the walls were many buildings arranged around several courts, with quite a few were sham structures. These dummy buildings were usually filled with sand or rubble intended for the Ka. The interior columns, which are the earliest known examples, are drummed, where the column is composed of stacked cylindrical segments as opposed to being cut from one stone, and fluted or closely spaced parallel grooves, giving the appearance of bundled reeds. In the remains of the North Palace, there are unfluted columns with the head of or capital of a bud or cell capital, as are commonly called, due to their shape. The two together represent papyrus stalks in bloom. Columns in the North Palace are engaged, meaning they are attached to the wall rather than freestanding to help support the weight of the ceiling. And so one of the reasons we really want to focus on pyramids is when we look architecturally. The architecture is one of those themes that really kind of runs throughout this whole course. The Egyptians really start us off on this understanding of how architecture begins to progress. And a couple of things we want to look for in the architecture, the idea of those different types of those different themes or concepts that run throughout. Perpetuality and the obsession with the afterlife. As these pyramids and we're all of these things that we have are reflective of that idea, that mindset of preserving forever, perpetually these pharaohs in their afterlife. And so recognizing that even as an architecture, we're talking about architecture, we're still talking about a reflection of that perpetuality, that obsession with the afterlife, and it's a reflection of their religious beliefs. And again, when we looked at how they express those four different themes or ideas, we're looking at how those are expressed through politics, through religion, again, that mindset, and even through the environment around them that they create and they respond to. All right. The Great Pyramids. So the Great Pyramids are considered the greatest achievement of the Old Kingdom. Architecture, considered the greatest achievement of Old Kingdom architecture are the pyramids of Giza, built by three kings of the 4th dynasty, Khufu, Kafri, and McGuire. I'm not even getting that one right in a little bit. But recognizing that that the Great Pyramids of Giza to this day are one of the wonders of the world, enormous in scale and size. The largest of these stands like 480 feet high. If you all have ever been in my Minecraft world, you know I've got a one of these built to scale in the interior of it. We're building everything related to Egypt here. So my middle schoolers have a different experience with this same sort of content. They actually get to build the pyramid stuff and the different things that we talk about here. They get to build inside these things. It's about 13 acres across at the base, and it's comprised of well over 2 million blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons. When the pyramids were first constructed, they were covered in smooth, polished limestone, which only a portion remains at the top of the Khafre's pyramid. They were also capped with a top block or pyramidion in the shape of a pyramid, which was probably covered with a thin sheet of gold to reflect the rays of the sun. And also that polished limestone was probably very bright and reflective, and again, would be seen from very far away. Each of the pyramids is perfectly oriented to the cardinal point of the compass, like Joju's building, and the pyramids of Khufu and Khafre, they are even on the same diagonal axis. All the pyramids face east towards the rising sun, towards the sun god Ra. These structures all represent the characteristics of ancient Egyptian art: order, perfection of form, stability, conveying mighty power of the Egyptian kings, perpetuity, built to last, an obsession with immortality, or built for the afterlife. Again, right there, that one paragraph right above Sphinx is the summation, really, of what you want to kind of look for and put into that open response there. When we look at the Great Sphinx, the Sphinx is a lion with a man's head, which is carved in situ or in place from a massive stone, desert stone. It's the earliest colossus or very large statue known, and the largest to be preserved. And the kids in the Minecraft world are building that inside of our Great Pyramid. Probably bearing the image of Khafre, the Great Sphinx represented a tremendous symbol of royal power to the ancient Egyptians. So we're going to pause just for a second here, make sure everybody's caught up and then has questions answered up to now. Pause. All right, start again. All right, let's try to wrap this up. Egyptian Old Kingdom. The first royal portrait known in history was that of the King Dozier during the Old Kingdom. Recovered from the Stab chamber in the step pyramid of the funerary complex of Saqqara. The sculpture originally had rock crystal eyes and was painted, but tomb robbers in time have eliminated those aspects. The king wears a small kilt, a black wig and royal headdress, and false ceremonial beard. The composition also completely frontal, compact, stiff, and serene. In other words, not a lot of life in it. Very stiff. These elements would serve as the model for all seated statues that follow throughout Egyptian history. Representative of the themes order, stability, perpetuity, and obsession with immortality. Imhotep, the artist, assigned his name at the base of the statue. Again, this is another example that you need to be putting in that open response. The statue of Kafri, built during the Second Great Pyramid of Giza, was recovered from the Valley Temple almost completely undamaged. The composition is similar to the sculpture of King Dozier in that it conveys calm, order, stability, perpetuity, and the Egyptian king's rule. So you can kind of see the differences and similarities. And I think we are getting close on time here, so we're going to zip ahead a little bit. Middle Kingdom and New Kingdom, around 2150 BCE, the people rose up against the rule of the pharaohs. After this uprising, Egypt languished in a state of civil unrest for about a century. Mentuhotep, a king from the Upper Egypt, united the nation once again and ushered in was now called the Middle Kingdom period. Dynasties 6 through, is that 9? I'm terrible with, nope, 11 through 14. I need to work on my Greek. Roman numerals. During this period, however, depended on the military might rather than the stability and divinity of the pharaohs. Middle Kingdom eventually disintegrated and control of the region was passed to a group of Asiatic rulers called the Hyksos, or Shepherd Kings. During their reign, the horse and the wheel were introduced to the Egyptians. By 1550 BCE, let's back up a second. The horse and the wheel. 1550 BCE, right in that area. That's pretty interesting. The last of the Hyksos rulers was overthrown by Amos, the first king of the 18th dynasty, rose to power at the beginning of the New Kingdom period. New Kingdom period, which lasted nearly 5 centuries, was the height of the Egyptian power, influence, and culture. The tremendous wealth generated from the spoils of war, taxes, brought about enormous architectural projects, namely mortuary temples, again, those dedications to pharaohs, pylon temples dedicated to the gods, and most of these structures were located around the capital of Thebes and Upper Egypt. So think about that environmentally. They are really changing the area around them and building these enormous structures, lots of architecture, great big buildings going up all around them. That changes the way they live, changes mindsets. We see the politics reflected in the dedication of things to the pharaohs, but also religion reflected in those pylon temples, things to the gods. So again, we're looking at, think about the ways that order, stability, or perpetuity, obsession with that immortality are reflected in religion. Well, we got those temples to the gods, right? We got those big temples to the deities. We've got the politics, where we've got these pyramids built to these pharaohs. Pharaohs are like the king, if you will. So they, it's got that political aspect to it. We think about the mindset and how everything that's going on in this society is reflective of everybody buying into, hey, our whole world is about order and stability and perpetuity and obsession with the immortality. So just kind of remember how those themes play, the 4 themes, and really reflected in the things like politics, religion, and mindset, that sort of thing. All right. The first mortuary temple of interest is that of Queen. I'm not going to try that one. She was the first great female leader in history, and her temple served as the first pictorial tribute to a female in history of art. Her chief counsel, Senmut, designed the temple with 3 colonnaded terraces. A colonnade is a row of columns which support some sort of ceiling, which are connected by ramps. Originally, the terraces held gardens and less vegetation. And so Again, huge, giant structures built in honor politically to somebody. The Egyptian temples dedicated to gods rather than the pharaohs were called the pylon temples. Again, this is a reflection of that religious aspects and how these different themes are expressed through their religion. Pylon is a large stone structure with a sloping walls. The Egyptian pylon temples were again characteristics of order stability. The basic plan consisted of a pylon that was followed by a courtyard, then a hypostyle hall, and then a second hall that finally by a sanctuary. Usually decorated with relief features, including gods. The temple was dedicated to the pharaohs who sponsored the building of the temple. Statue of the pharaohs and the obelisks, tall, thin, four-sided shaft of tapering stone that rises to a pyramidal point, were placed in front. The first courtyard was open and lined with colonnades. And so we're going to probably have to stop because I think we're getting real close to the end here. The Amarnara period, I did not even get that one right. Towards the later years of the 18th century, the pharaoh Amenhotep the fourth came to the throne. The new pharaoh abandoned the worship of the traditional Egyptian gods altogether for the worship of Aton, who believed the only god, though this deity is still associated with the sun. Pharaoh shut down other temples, disinherited the priests, and removed the name Amun-Ra from all inscriptions. The king even changed his own name in honor of his god. It was moved to the capital of the river, place now called Tel Amarna. And with all of the religious and cultural upheavals of the time, the art of Amarna period reflected this revolution. And so almost all art we see from that brief period of time is reflective of that revolution and that change, that massive evolution in the Egyptian culture. The statue of Akhenaton, the eliminated portrayal of the effeminate portrayal of the king, along with his elongated neck, small arms, oddly shaped body, must have been shocking to the Egyptians because it was the first to represent the pharaoh naturalistic rather than idealistic. And that, when we look at evolution art, that was a paramount or pivotal point, really. That going from this naturalistic rather than idealistic, and we're going to see the battle between naturalistic and idealistic through the Greeks, the Romans. This is one of those things that we see mankind of deal with throughout artistic endeavors. Nefertiti, Akhenaten, I think is how you pronounce that. Relief showing Akhenaten and Nefertiti and the royal princesses basking under the rays of Aton, who is usually represented by a sun disk, also depicts the royals naturalistic with non-Egyptian-like qualities. Tutankhamun became king when he was 8 years old. King Tut, he was and died when he was 10 years later. An insignificant figure in Egyptian history, he was a household name because his tomb was discovered unplundered. Inside were staggering amounts of gold, precious stone, other treasures. And think about how many of those there probably still are that we haven't discovered yet. Goodness only knows. The mummy of the boy king was placed inside the innermost of 3 coffins. The innermost coffin, weighing over 200 pounds, comprised of beaten gold, other precious stones such as lapis lazuli and turquoise. The funerary mask, which was placed over the face of the deceased, is probably the most famous piece of the find. This tremendously sensitive portrait, there is evidence of the Amarna influence. Tutankhamun is presented wearing the ceremonial beard and with the vulture of the upper Egypt and the serpent in the lower Egypt above his head. The mask, too, is made of solid gold and inlaid with precious stones. Egyptian power and influence slowly faded away due in part to multiple foreign invasions. Egypt came under the control of the Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans. Despite continued occupation, the characteristic art forms established in the Old Kingdom period remained. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today. This is not your assignment. This is your assignment over here. Make sure you're answering these 5 questions. Answer them correctly. Please be complete in your answer, and we'll talk briefly here if we have time to make sure you've got the answers you need. All right.